Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everybody. Many of us deal with challenges all the time, as our daily day could be something holding us back. We have fear, sometimes phobias, lots going on. And that essentially comes from our past, specifically our childhood. Could be traumas there. We talked about different types of trauma, the big T, the little t type traumas. Why does it affect us? What's actually going on within our brain? Never talked about this. We're going to do it today. Going to be very insightful, impactful with our Diamond of the Decade, and she is the woman behind a great counseling center up in Massachusetts. They help people all the time, all different types of people. Sherri and Alexandrovich joins us once again on the program. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. How you doing today, Steve?
Very well.
Good.
I'm classes in session.
Yeah.
eager to learn. And I do regret when I was in college, I had psychology and I switched it out for another class because, as a kid, I'm like, what do I need that for? I am fascinated by the way the mind works. It's like so cool. And it's never too late. I could go back to school and brush up on that kind of stuff. But where do we begin today in terms of understanding how the brain works?
Okay, so I think one of the biggest points of confusion for us, right, when we experience some sort of trauma in our body is why does our body continue to respond in this heightened or activated way? And so understanding triggers, it's important on several different levels. Understanding the trigger in itself is important. So the event and what is the event that's causing the trigger, that in itself is in one category. But I think also understanding how our brain responds after a traumatic event is really important. So what I typically will do when I'm working with some of my intense clients who've had trauma is I'll kind of draw like an oval, almost like an egg shape, right? And if you think about how information comes into our brain, gets processed, and then how it comes out, meaning how we react to it, what we say, all plays a part in how our brain just absorbed that information. So we have the prefrontal cortex, we have our amygdala, we have our hippocampus. All of that is impacted by the trauma that we've experienced in some way. So that then shapes how it is that will respond to something. So if you can kind of envision, you've got the brain and the information is coming in and we hear it. But before we can respond, it goes through all of the different channels inside of our brain. And so in its most basic explanation, imagine going in through the top, and then there's this swamp, this sludge that's down here. And so the information is going to come through and then come back out. So whatever is happening in this sludgy, swampy area down here is going to impact how we respond, how we react, how we perceive. So the trauma brain plays a large part in why we say and or do the things that we do. Not saying that there's an excuse or a reason, just an explanation. And so knowledge is power. Understanding why can then help us to kind of go back. So the wonderful thing about the brain is as much as it has been shaped and or altered for that traumatic event, it can also be reshaped and re-altered by going back and either doing the therapy that you need to change those memories, to change those experiences.
Is it like a filter? Like when you said information comes in and then it goes through a process, is it passing through filters to maybe confirm what the mind is like? Is that a fear? Yes, it's a fear. On to the next one.
Yes.
Have I experienced this one before? Yes, I felt this once before. In milliseconds as it rolls through.
Yes, absolutely. And it happens so quickly that sometimes we don't even realize that it's happening. So, I mean, the amygdala is our alarm system. And so if that's
Ah,
been heightened or that's been somehow, in some sort of unsafe experience. So our amygdala is always going to be on high alert. And you see these kids or even these adults who are super hyper vigilant and they're always on alert. And that's because their amygdala is just operating on this really high alert sense because they've had to go into fight or flight for however, whatever experience that they've had. And then we have the hippocampus, right? That stores our conscious memories. And all of that is, they all kind of interweave and they all play a part. So when the information's coming through to all the different parts of our brain, it's picking up, so to speak, right, on all these little different parts that are coming. And then the prefrontal cortex is the information, that's our decision making. So we've got all of this stuff that's impacting that information that we are receiving, whether it's somebody's having a conversation with us, whether we are seeing something that looks like it could be potentially dangerous because we've had an experience similar to that in the past, that activates what our brain looks like. So when it comes in and then it goes through filter, I like that. That's a really good way, a great analogy of explaining. And then it gets shaped, it gets shifted, it gets fragmented, and then it comes out either in an argumentative, a defensiveness. Some people, it's silly. Some people laugh. You ever talk to somebody, a kid, and their reaction to something is they're smiling or they're laughing, and you're thinking as the adult, wow, you're being really disrespectful, or do you think that that's funny? But they may not be laughing because they think it's funny. That could just be their internal system. They're feeling uncomfortable and they don't know what to do about that. So instead of crying, they might laugh, or instead of shutting down, they might become angry and defensive. Everybody has a different way of responding to that, and that varies from person to person.
now we're talking about new traumas.
Mm-hmm.
What about when it's an old trauma? Yeah, it's already been established in the mind,
Mm-hmm.
and then a trigger comes up. As I understand it, that the subconscious is always looking for proof
Mm-hmm.
to back itself up. It's got beliefs. Now I've got this belief now. This trauma happened when my person, I'm the brain. My person was 7 years old. Something came about. Could have heard a conversation from a parent. Could have got yelled at for laughing
Mm-hmm.
in class. Happened to me, second grade. Never forget it. Um, and it impacted me in some ways, little ways, but I believe as I trace it all back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now, as life goes on, something presents itself. Is the subconscious again putting it through the filter? Oh, yeah, that connects with that time back then. This is real. Yeah, fear, or whatever the response is, the trauma response.
Right. And that validation that your brain now has doesn't mean that it's real information. It is experiences,
Right.
perceptions. So that's the importance of understanding it, because then we can reshape it. Just because the brain uses it as evidence doesn't mean that it's concrete. It means that that's the brain's information that it has based on an experience, based on a situation. But we can go back and we can change that. And that's why when we're in therapy and we're talking about, and I know that I think I find a reason to say this at every podcast because I just really love this analogy, is that when our responses or reactions are disproportionate to the situation, that is our first indication something's wrong. If somebody makes a comment and you become super reactive to that. Well, what is it about that comment? What was it in there that made you feel like you needed to be defensive? Because if somebody told you, or I said the same exact sentence to somebody else, they may just say, okay, well, that's fine, or no big deal, and it might roll off their shoulders. But other people might be more sensitive to that.
Hmm.
Oh, I don't really like the way that dress looks on you. That could mean a multitude of different things based on how people are perceiving or experiencing that feedback.
Hmm. Are you fascinated, even doing this work for
Love it.
years?
Love
Is
it.
does it still, do you still in awe of like how the brain works? Whoa.
All the time, all the
Mm,
time. I think what I love even more is when I can watch the shapes, watch the shifting, watch the changes in the healing of the brain. That for me is where I get super excited because when you know that someone has these really intense experiences and it's impacting their life in so many different ways, and then you can start to slowly see the changes on how they're shifting, what their responses are to that. That's just such, and it's so different for every person. So there's no cookie cutter response or therapeutic model for everybody. It's just so individualized, which just makes it
mm.
every day is like a new challenge.
Have you ever confronted somebody, worked with someone, and wondered if you could help them?
As a colleague.
As a practitioner,
Mm.
did you have that, based on what they've been through, what they described, did you have a moment of of course you're going to do your best, but, doubts that whether you can actually help them?
Have I personally ever contemplated whether I could help a client based on their experience?
Hmm.
Um, I don't think so. I don't think I've ever had that moment of doubt, and here's why. Because the moment we step into a person's life in a therapeutic way, we're already starting to offer something that they didn't have before, even if it's as simple as a support system.
Hmm.
And so I think in those moments, we're able to offer something that they've not had before. And that in itself, regardless of how big it is or how small it is impactful. So I like to believe that I can make a difference or an impact for everybody, regardless of what the level of that impact is. I think for clinicians, we have at New Beginnings, we do a biweekly support group, which is just specifically for us clinicians to just support each other for cases that we're struggling with or we're looking for different feedback with. We also do a weekly MDT meeting, which is a multidisciplinary team meeting so that we have an opportunity to present some of these harder cases and get feedback and different perspectives on how us as a clinical team can approach something. So I think even if we're feeling stuck or we're feeling, what else or what more can we do, we use each other as resources to bounce that off of. And there's, we have such a close-knit family here at New Beginnings that I mean, we just like without thinking, we'll pick up a phone and send a text message to a colleague and say, "Hey, you got 5 minutes," or "Can I process this with you?" And sometimes it's you just need to hear yourself say it out loud to be like, "Oh no, yeah, that's exactly where I was going. I just kind of needed some help with that." That's the wonderful thing about a clinic setting versus a private practice setting. And I've worked in a multitude of different therapeutic settings in the past. And when I had my private practice, it's very isolating because you don't have those colleagues to bounce ideas off of or to run things by. And so that's really what I love about kind of like a clinic setting is having the wealth of resources that's available because every clinician brings something different to the table.
And major health organizations do just what you described. Even there are some, maybe they all do it, I don't know, but I'm aware that even if it's a cancer treatment and they're
Right.
going to do radiation,
Mhm.
the doctor will set it all up, do a simulation, but before they start any kind of treatment, it's taken to all of them.
Mhm.
And it could be 15 different doctors reviewing all different cases. All right, this is what we got here. Take a look at this. This is what we're looking at. What are your, how about the slices in terms of the radiation? And
Mhm.
they're all talking about it, adding a little bit
Brainstorming.
of expertise along the way. And that's what you and your team are doing.
We do that all the time, and that's really the philosophy here at New Beginnings is that
Hmm.
we all work together as a team. There really isn't a hierarchy as to who's where or what, or the number of initials that's after your name is none of that's really important here. And even being the owner of New Beginnings, I also understand that I need a team to bounce ideas off of because I don't know everything. And I've got my hands in many different pockets. I'm handling the business side of things. I'm also a clinician. I'm also a supervisor. I'm also supervising my supervisors. So I'm a little disjointed and on any given day in 5 or 6 different directions. I also know that I have an amazing team who offers great feedback and great ideas. And so whenever there's a big decision or I'm doing some sort of planning for the next year, we throw out a survey. I'll throw out a team meeting or at a staff meeting and just get some ideas. What do we need differently? What do you guys think about this? Or so everything done here and for my agency is collaboratively because I love all of my family here and we all have really great ideas and somebody's always got something you just didn't think about.
Hmm.
And so it's important to respect, everybody's opinions and weigh it all before you make any decisions.
I look at it as camera angles. You watch a TV show, movie, or whatever it is, you're going to see it from here, see it from here, see it from here. Well, they have multiple people on camera operating the camera. And then the
Right.
director, sometimes multiple directors of different shots to get. So it's to me, it's very similar where somebody else is going to come in and say, yeah, do you ever think about this? It's a different angle,
Right.
different camera angle.
Absolutely. And sometimes we've been working with clients for a long time and fresh ideas are always good and new feedback is always good. Or, maybe we've missed something because we're focused over here and then someone will come in and say, well, what about this little thing over here? Oh, wait a minute. Yep, let's pull that in too. And that's important. And we also do quarterly treatment plan updates with our clients. So we're sitting down with our clients and we're saying, what are the goals? How are we measuring them? It's been 90 days. Are we seeing any progress in this particular area? And if not, why? And that those are great supervision questions. So I will review with the people that I supervise. How are we meeting our treatment plan goals? Let's review the treatment plan goals. Let's tweak them a little bit. Are they client friendly? What is the language that we're using? Because sometimes there's just a disconnect in how you're explaining something. And if you can just take that step back and that pause and really hear collectively what the client is saying, what the parents are saying, what the school is saying, what DCF is saying, then we can get a much better, well-rounded, collaborative picture of what our client is experiencing. And that's why it's so important for us to work as a team, whether it's internally or externally.
What else can you tell us about the brain?
Oh, the brain is just wonderful. I just love our brains. They're just so amazing, and they have so much ability to shape and change. I think one of the other big things is we talked a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, and where that stands on the pyramid. But when you look at a similar pyramid, it's not Maslow's pyramid, but it's just a similar pyramid of what the brain is processing through. The survival, our internal survival for the non-trauma brain is the smaller part of the triangle because that is not what is most important to us, right? It's development, it's cognition, it's learning, it's education. Those are the bigger blocks on the triangle. But when you look at the trauma brain, survival is bigger than anything else because that is what we need to protect ourselves because we're on this hypervigilant alert. So
Mm.
when survival is our number one basic need that we need to take care of, it is then going to impact our ability to learn, our ability to communicate, our ability to regulate, how we behave, the relationships that we have. If we're so focused on survival, those other areas are not our primary concerns. And so that's really important when you're really dissecting the picture of somebody who's had that kind of trauma and understanding why are they not meeting that next level? Where's the block?
When you talk about the trauma brain, is it that section of the brain that deals with trauma and it's all right there. It's stored in that section.
It's stored it impacts several different parts of the brain. It doesn't just impact the one part of the brain. It impacts everything. It impacts our prefrontal cortex, our amygdala, our hippocampus. It goes through and everything impacts everything else. If you look at the brain, because it's separate, but it's not. Because it's going through the different channels, and depending on what our trauma looks like, it impacts the different parts differently, and that's really individualized depending on the person. So
Well,
it's yep, go ahead.
when you say trauma, and we talked about it before, the different types, it could be a comment that somebody made when you were 7. It could be something big, like the passing of a relative, whatever it might be.
Mm.
When we look at trauma, would you say that that is the number one thing that's holding us back in our lives, moving our lives forward, doing the things we want to do? Is it the trauma?
Well, hmm. The trauma played a role in impacting us. However, our ability to, there are other factors. Did we get into therapy? What was our support system look like? Who was the person inflicting the trauma? Are they still part of our life? Are we still experiencing that trauma? There are so many variables that are involved in that, that I don't want to just say a global answer of, yes, it's just the trauma. Because if you think about two people, same exact experience, two different outcomes, same trauma.
Yep.
It really had to do with so many other variables. So I don't want to just tie it to just trauma. I think that it's so impactful on so many different levels. And it really just, it has to do with our resiliency. What are the skills that we have? What is our support system? Do we have any family? Do we have any friends? All of that, I think those elements are as important, and if not more important, depending on the situation.
It's fascinating.
Oh, it's yeah, it is. And I think understanding it. So when I have just drawn this really basic egg, like on a piece of paper, just a big white piece of paper, and I will be working through a problem with a client, and I'll say, all right, so what is the problem? And I'll label it up at the top, and I'll kind of draw it through, and then down I'll put the swamp. And then I'll list everything that person, because I've known them, has experienced. And so I'll almost do like okay, so let's pretend, let's go on this little ride together, and here we are, and we're going through, and then I'll throw in the car all of these other things that were happening. And then as we're driving the car out of the brain, well, we have a very different path now, because the directions we got over here are not the directions that came out over here. And you can help somebody to see that visually on a piece of paper if you just kind of go through it with them. And that's really if you have a very specific example, and it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense, especially when you start learning how this all works. I've had epiphanies all the time back to my childhood. Now that I guess I'm in the mode of seeing it, and it's not like I'm just saying, oh, that's the reason why I think this and think that. No, I could be having a conversation with somebody who's like, oh, wait a minute, that connects back to, and it's kind of fascinating the way that works.
So fascinating. It's so fascinating. And sometimes we don't even know it, or we've had an experience that we don't remember. We didn't know it happened, or we didn't really even realize how much it impacted us until we're in that moment. And I talk pretty freely to anybody. I'm a pretty transparent person about my own trauma and my own background, and I know my triggers. So and I know for me that I am a super strong advocate for other people, because for me the importance is my work is to make sure that somebody else doesn't ever have that experience. And if I can't prevent them from having that experience, I'm going to walk beside them, and I'm going to hold their hand virtually to make sure that they know that they have that support system. For me, I'm hyper vigilant about that. I know that about me. I know that that is something for me that is a showstopper. I will not be able to let somebody have an experience and not stop and help them, whether I'm at work or whether it's a personal experience for me. I know that about me. I share that with my friends. If I have to stop over here because I'm not going to be able to let this person who on the side of the road clearly looks upset, or clearly looks like they're on drugs and they need some help and they need me to call an ambulance, I'm not going to be able to walk away from that. So that's why I said in the beginning, knowledge is power. So I know that about me. So I factor in that flexibility that, okay, so if you're going to be my friend, or you're going to be my partner, or you're going to be in whatever world, you have to expect that that's what's going to happen. I'm going to stop. I'm going to help. And that's part of accepting.
Because you're an empath. Because you're an empath.
I am an empath.
And honestly and truly, what you just described happened to me yesterday. I was at a venue. I was at an event. Somebody passed out. Nobody really went over to help him. It was a young person. I was like 21. I'm like, what? And I ran over there. There was no security around. I ran, found somebody, 911. I had a cloth on her forehead or whatever. It was like, I didn't even know I was doing it because it had to get done.
It's second nature.
Second nature.
Exactly. But the world needs more people like that. I was doing about 10 years ago or so, we were down on Main Street and we were doing an event for substance abuse. It was pouring rain outside. And it was all about just bringing awareness to the overdose epidemic here in the city.
Hmm.
And there was off to the side, there was a kid, I don't know how old he was, 18, 19. He was young. Uh, Very clear, was not a homeless kid, very clearly well dressed, right? You could tell that he was not a homeless kiddo, had overdosed, and he's just sitting there in the rain, and we're at this seminar, and I'm going, so I'm like sitting in a dress on the ground with him in the rain, and I'm like calling 911. I'm waiting for paramedics to get there. I mean, that could be anyone. I mean, that could have been my son. That could be anybody's kid.
Yeah.
And sometimes people will just walk by without thinking or even have the awareness of it, And so I mean, and this kid, thankfully, we were able to get him to the hospital and he lived. I mean, so it was like,
Yeah.
what an
Yeah.
impactful moment that is to just be able to just be aware and say, everybody sometimes just needs that help or that somebody that's going to sit next to them and make
And
sure that the right people get there.
well, that's what you and your staff does. You walk next to people and help them move their lives forward
Yeah.
in a wonderful way. You can do some of this virtual. How do we connect with you, even if somebody's got a question about what we talked about today?
So our website is newbeginningswc.com. And if you go over to the, I think it says clinical page or clinical team, I'm listed on there and my email address is on there. So you could easily just kind of click on any one of my supervisors are listed on the website as well. You can click on it and shoot me a question and I can do the best I can to get back in a timely fashion.
I appreciate all the insight today, the better
Yeah.
understanding of this thing that we all have called the brain. And looking forward, Sherri Ann, next time we get together. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.